Welcome to Excel and Finance video number 2. Hey, if you want to download this workbook and follow along, click on my YouTube channel, then click on my college website link, and you can download the workbook, Finance in Excel, Chapter 00. Yes, this is for a finance class, and we're talking about Chapter 00, which just is an introduction to Excel and math. Now, this workbook, we did our last video, we had an introduction to ribbons and Excel and whatnot. This workbook will have the yellow sheet tabs will be information. The blue ones will be the empty templates. You can see there's a cell, and you'll complete that in class or watching the video. And then the red ones will have the answer, the completed answers. Now I'm going to use my arrow key. Notice the arrow key, as we talked about in the last video, scrolls through the sheet but keeps the sheet, the current sheet, still active. Another way to do this is control page down. That actually moves the sheet and the active sheet. So we want to start on this one, formula and functions. In this video, we're going to talk about formulas and functions. Now, a formula always starts with an equal sign. That's the symbol you type into the cell, equal sign, that tells Excel, hey, that you're telling Excel, hey, I'm going to do a formula. Now, in this example here, we have a annual rate, and there are 2 periods per year. Later, when we talk about bonds in Chapter 6, we'll have bonds that pay interest twice a year. So you can't use the whole rate, 7.75%, or as a decimal point, 0.775. You cannot use that to calculate interest. You've got to divide it by 2. Now, get this. This is a formula. We talked about this a little bit in the last video, but we're going to emphasize it here. When you have numbers that can change, like interest rate, number of periods, loan amount, and you're building a little financial template like this, you never type these numbers into the cells. Instead, use cell references. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and click with our mouse, our white selection cursor, and you can see it puts B2 in the cell. And we use our math operator / for division, and we divide by 2. Notice this is not 0.0775 divided by 2. It's B2 divided by B3. All right, so that's how we'll do it here. One further point, formula inputs in cells, formulas with cell reference pointing to the formula inputs, but always label your formula inputs. That's just important. You know, you guys want to be good at finance and Excel, so you're going to do it. Those of you in my class, you also have an added incentive, because if you hand in a test without labels, formula inputs, and proper formulas with cell references, well, you get hardly any points at all. All right, here's what you never do. And unfortunately, in the working world, you see a lot of this. 0.0775 divided by 2. And that's what they do. They get the same answer. But there's 2 problems. The first problem is, as soon as the interest rate changes, right? So we're going to change this to 9.5. This formula beautifully updates. And you can see the formula up there. It's B2 divided by B3. So these, anything we put there, it changes. But this one did not. Number one, it's faster. It's faster to change inputs. Number 2, you clearly see explicitly what your rate and periods are, and they're labeled properly. The third reason is, if you have a spreadsheet filled with these and they're all over your spreadsheets and they don't have any labels, man, how are you going to edit your formulas? So never do that. Another formula. And over here, I'm going to hit F2. That puts it in edit mode. We created our formula with cell references using our cursor, that white cursor. Over here, we're going to see a different method. We're going to type an equal sign, and instead of touching your mouse, use the up arrow key. Why don't I take up arrow, revenues minus up arrow. Totally awesome. That is faster if your cell references with formula inputs are close to the formula. So using arrow keys, totally awesome. Now, in this class, I will always, or almost always, list the labels in dark blue, the formula inputs in white, and then any cell that has a formula in green. That's just, out in the working world, you probably wouldn't want to do that when you're making reports. But for this class, just to help us decipher, there's going to be a color code. Formulas, formula inputs, and labels. Sometimes in assumption tables, you'll see I use red, but most of the time I use blue. Now, those are formulas, right? We saw how we used an equal sign and some cell references. Now let's look at another type of formula. I'm on this sheet right here. I'm going to hit Control, page down, and get to the Sheet tab for the sheet named Functions. And I want to look at functions. Now, I always have notes. There's some notes over here. You can see there we're down here. Sometimes I have them up at the top, some at the bottom. So when you download this, you can read the notes. They usually have the highlights of what we're doing in each video. All right, we talked about in the first video the sum function. There's a keyboard shortcut in this class. We're going to use it. We're not going to go home, click on this to get the auto sum. We're going to use the keyboard shortcut, Alt equals. You hold Alt and tap equals. Now remember, when you're putting functions in, whether you're using the keyboard shortcut or sometimes we'll use the insert function and the function dialog box, it always tries to guess. You can see the dancing ants are dancing around the cells. If it's correct, then you can hit Enter. If it's not, for instance, if this really should have been over here, notice as long as the dancing ants are dancing, you can just click and drag. Oh, I made a mistake. Oh no. Oh no. As long as they're dancing, you can edit. And when you finally get it right, there you go. And you hit Enter. This is what you never want to do. Notice up here you can see equal sign means it's a formula. Sum, that's the function. And a range, B7 colon all the way to B10. Never do this. Equals that plus, and unfortunately, again, in the working world, you see this all the time. My first day in accounting job, almost 10 or 12 years ago, a long time now, came in and the accountant gave me the template that the last person working there had made, and it was filled with junk like this. I said, can I change the spreadsheet? Right, so you get the same answer, but what's the problem with this? If I click on that cell and hit F2, well, first off, it takes longer to make. And second, escape, since spreadsheets are dynamic, these are cash flows. What if all of a sudden you wanted to insert a couple more cash flows here, and you went right-click on the row header, right-click, insert. And then you typed 400 here. I'm using my tab key and 400 here. Well, you could see that this formula updated, but this one didn't. I'm going to click here and hit F2. Because there were bookends, B7 to B11 with a colon in between. When I insert something in between those bookends, it updates. Escape, click here, F2. That puts it into edit mode. Didn't update. Deadly mistake. And on my first accounting job, like it was fate or something, the accountant came in and says, I want you to build a new template. And I had already changed it all to sums, and all she wanted me to do was to insert a couple extra months, and I did it in front of her eyes. And of course, she thought that was magic, when all it was using a range like that. All right, a couple more functions. Remember, functions are also formulas. If I click in this cell, you can see equal sign, and this formula just happens to have a function. Later, we'll have formulas that have functions and cell references and math operators and everything. Here's another one we'll do later in the class. We'll take average or mean, arithmetic mean, the average of all of these returns. I'm going to type, because a lot of times in this class, we're going to use the same function over and over. We're going to use average over and over. We're going to use PMT for monthly loan payment, or loan payment over and over. So we'll type them because it's much faster than using your mouse and going and searching for it. As soon as you see it highlighted in blue, you can hit the tab. If you don't like that, you can type like this. You can come down here and select it and then hit tab. You could even do this. Double click. I usually, since PMT and average and some of the other functions we'll use in this class, usually after 20 times you know what letters you have to type. You type AVER and then tab. All right, and then we can simply click and drag. You also don't have to, when you have a simple sum or average or something like that, you don't have to type that last little closing parenthesis. You can just hit Enter. And there is our average, right? This is like 2007, 2008, and then some measly averages. So over the last 4 years, our average on this particular stock was really terrible. All right, now let's see how to search for a function. We want to calculate a loan payment. So I'm clicking in the cell. I have my labels and formula inputs here. I just want my yearly interest payment. Later we'll do monthly and semi-annual and quarterly and all sorts of amazing finance tricks. But here, just how do I calculate? I'm sorry, this is not. Yeah, this is the yearly payment. We're going to have a loan for $50,000 at this annual rate and this many years. We need to know the yearly payment. I'm going to click here. There's other ways to get insert function, but that's fast. There is a keyboard shortcut, Shift F3. I tend to never use that. Shift plus F3. That is insert. That's show me my list of functions. So I'm going to click here. This is the way I usually do it. And there's insert function. I clicked escape. Shift F3 also does that. All right. We can search. We can also go to all, which is the category you want to select. And then you got all in 2010. There's over 400 functions. In 2007, there's like 350. And you can type. Come up here and type. I'm just going to type loan payment. I can't spell or type payment. And then click go. All right, and then it gives you a list, and especially in some of these finance nodes, these are all finance functions. We'll get to see almost all of those. The only reason why we won't see a few of them is because we have different ways to do it than the function. But look, there's a list here, and here's a description. Any one of these, you might have to click on a number of them and read the description to find out what it is, the function you really want. But let's read this. Calculates the payment for a loan based on constant payments and a constant interest rate. We'll talk all about the details of that later, but that's exactly what we want. We're like, woohoo! So now I'm going to click OK. And the advantage of using the functions argument dialog box is every time you click or use tab to move forward, the description here changes. I'm going to use shift tab to go backwards, or click. Notice it explains what that argument should be. Now, this PMT, for this example, we're going to use these 3 arguments. Later in this class, since this is a finance class, we'll definitely see the use for these other arguments. These are in bold, so these are ones that are mandatory. The ones that are not in bold means it'll work without it. We'll learn those arguments later. But notice there's 5 arguments. Now, that word argument comes from math. It just means a number I need in my function to get it to calculate the right answer. Now, rate. Let's read this. Is the interest rate per period for the loan? For example, use 6% divided by 4 for quarterly payments at 6% APR. So it even gives you a hint here. Now, you can grab the title bar like this, and actually, if you shake it up, it tends to obey better. So let it know who's boss. All right. Now, rate. As soon as you see a text box with this, it means you're allowed to have your cursor there and click on a cell. So our rate is going to be annual. All right, and then I'm going to hit tab, and I got NPER. NPER says, is the total number of payments for the loan. Well, this is a simple one. Later we'll see much more complicated ones. 10. We need 10. And tab, present value. We'll get to talk about that for the first time in chapter 4. But for our purpose here, just think of present value as how much the loan is worth right now. So I'm going to click on this cell right here. Now, let's notice some great things about the functions argument dialog box. It gives you a preview over here of the input. So here, very conveniently, we see our cell references, which is what we're going to use for any formula. When the number doesn't change, you put it into a cell and use the cell reference. Here's our preview, which is helpful. Here's our unformatted answer. You can see lots of decimals hanging out there. And there's our formatted answer. Now, we'll talk about what this formatting stuff does in just a few videos ahead here. But there it is. Let's click OK, and there's our answer. Now, that is accounting. This is actually currency format, and those parentheses in accounting, debits and credits, assets equal liabilities plus owner's equity, accounting, parentheses mean minus. Now, if you don't like that, later we'll talk about number formatting, but I'm going to show you right now how to change that. Control plus 1. That is the keyboard shortcut we are going to use for format cells. Format cells can do anything. It changes the number formatting, the color, the font color, the borders, everything. Control 1. The very first tab, and we won't look at many of these in this class just because we're doing mostly calculating. We will look at a few of them, though, in our last video for chapter 00. Number, this is the one we'll be using all the time. Currency, that's what happens to be applied. I'm going to come over here. It gives me a sample. It tells me how many decimal places. The symbol, because I can have whatever other currency I want, and there's a lot here. And here's negative numbers. So I'm going to click here because I don't want to see that parenthesis. Just a little negative. All right, click OK. More about number formatting later. And also, we'll spend chapters talking about cash flow analysis and why this is negative. But just realize that if you borrowed this much money and this is your monthly payment, it's minus because it's coming out of your wallet. You have to write the check and send it to the bank. All right. One other thing, or two other things about formulas and functions. I'm going to show you how to type this because this is probably one of the most common functions we'll use. We'll type it out like this, and once we get used to it, we don't need to go up to the functions argument dialog box to read about each one of these arguments. We'll be fluent after a couple chapters with PMT, so we'll just go rate, and that'll remind us what comes first. So we'll go rate like that. And watch the screen tip. It's bold. When I type a comma, it moves on to the next one. Now, if you're doing it for the first time, using PMT for the first time, you're like, NPER, what's that? But again, this is for when we get used to it. We're like, oh, that's the number of payments. So we click there. It's bold, so it means I'm still in that argument. But when I type a comma, boom, it says give me the present value. And I click right there. We will use screen tips a lot in this class. Totally awesome. When I close parentheses, the screen tip goes away, and enter. One last thing. That was I want to come back over here to this sheet right here. Or notice that sheet is the selected one, so I can control page up. I want to go to formula and formula inputs. Now here, we talked about these numbers, putting formula inputs in cells. Now here's the rule, and it's written down here totally clearly. If the number can ever change, which means if you build a template for loans, the interest rates do change. Sometimes you have a different loan amount. Sometimes you have a different number of periods. If these numbers can change, you type them into a cell. So that's what we did. Our calculation here was just period rate. Aha! But if the number never changes, which we'll see some examples coming up later, then you can type the number into the cell. For example, if you were going to get the effective rate, and we'll do this later in this class, this is just an example of when there's a number that doesn't change. I'm going to go equals, open parentheses, 1 plus. That 1, and we'll talk about ones coming up also, that 1 is never going to change ever. So you do not put it into a cell. You say 1 plus the period rate divided by the, actually, why don't we do it this way? All right. Just pretend I didn't do that. 1 plus the annual rate divided by our number of periods, and then you close parentheses. And then you have to raise it to an exponent. And the exponent that you raise it to is the number of periods per year. And then you subtract 1. Now, all of the cell references here are numbers that can change. But that 1 and that 1 never change, so we can just leave it like that. Now, we'll learn this, chapter 6, I think it is. But that's an example. Another example, which we don't ever get to do in this class, if you do payroll, a lot of times you have to multiply the portion of 1 day times the number 24. Another example in this class, when you're building a template for consumer loans, a lot of times it's never anything but monthly. And so in that case, this denominator, you could type at 12. All right, so get it? In this video, formula inputs that change go into cells. Formula inputs that don't change, like the number 1 in some of our interest rate formulas, like the number 12 when we get to some of our consumer loans, those can be typed into a formula. All right, that's a little bit about formulas and functions. One last list. You can just look here. The yellow ones usually mean just information. In this class, the things that can go into formulas, here's a list of them. Here's basically the ones we're going to use. Equal sign, cell references, math operators like plus, minus, etc. Built-in functions like average, sum, and PMT, and numbers if they will not change. Those are the things we're going to see in our financial formulas. We may occasionally see a comparative operator just to see if something's greater than something else. These other ones I don't think we will get to see. All right, when we come back in our next video, we're going to have to talk about math symbols and order of precedence, exponents, and a few other math items. All right, see you next video.